The bigger problem we have is we have a lot of people that have been indoctrinated into an idea that they should always feel wonderful and that they are addicted to comfort emotionally, in the sense that if anything is uncomfortable, it must be wrong. And so people have to grow up. And there are people, like, you're going to marry an imperfect person. They might have a temper, they might be selfish, they probably are both of those things. They could be. The world believes in selfishness. It believes in entitlement. That's why there is a movement of narcissism. So when people talk about narcissism online, I'm dating a narcissist, my husband is a closet narcissist.
Hello and welcome back to Marriage Sparks, where it's going to get a little feisty today. Talking about some emotional abuse is the topic we are going to tackle, and it can be a very serious thing. And I also personally believe it's an overused term.
Yeah, and so I want you to explain what you've seen, because you follow a lot of social media things, or you hear a lot about this from the community or whatnot. I guess I'm kind of live in a bubble that's just a little different.
Yeah, because I think there are serious, validate that there are serious concerns when somebody is constantly attacking you, constantly condescending, constantly putting you down, making you feel terrible, like stomping you with their words. I feel like there is some merit to that. I also feel like being yelled at, having, let's say you have a spouse with a temper control, and I'm not talking physical abuse, but we're going to stick in the emotional realm. And they're a yeller. That is definitely a fault. It's a big fault, and it's one that can be addressed. But I do not think that every time that you have a spouse who's a yeller, it automatically means emotional abuse. I think I've seen people jump to that far too frequently. I have seen people say, I don't know what to do in this occasion, help. And people, that's emotional abuse. You need to take your kids and get out of there. I'm like, dude, yeah, he yelled at his kid and then he belittled you, and then he came back and apologized, and, this isn't a regular pattern, this isn't you know what I mean? I feel like, why do we jump to emotional abuse? Why have we labeled what is the difference between, yeah, I mean, I think everybody does have faults, and what is the difference? I don't know, but sometimes I feel like we're so quick to label everything emotional abuse and almost, give ourselves an out to the marriage, well, what used to be, I just remember, Aunt Bridget and Uncle Lou joking about, she's 92 now, so back in the day, it was older than boomers. What was that generation post World War II? Right?
Yeah, I have no idea. They're old.
Once a week, you got clothes in the lawn, And, but the way they talked about, but they had what, 48 years of marriage? I mean, and it didn't seem like it was an emotionally abusive marriage, but the way they've told us stories, I think, through today's lens, probably could say, wow, it was emotionally abusive because you were yelling at him and he was yelling. I don't know.
I think the bigger problem we have is we have a lot of people that have been indoctrinated into an idea that they should always feel wonderful and that they are addicted to comfort emotionally, in the sense that if anything is uncomfortable, it must be wrong. And so people have to grow up. And there are people, like, you're going to marry an imperfect person. They might have a temper, they might be selfish, they probably are both of those things. They could be. And again, I think that for the world right now, the world does not support marriage. It certainly doesn't believe in the sacrament of marriage. It believes in selfishness. It believes in entitlement. It believes that, for the most part, I mean, that's why there is a movement of narcissism. So when people talk about narcissism online, I'm dating a narcissist, my husband is a closet narcissist. That's really just because we're in this vacuum system of whatever you think is right, whatever you feel is correct. But that produces a level of terror in people. So people are unable to recognize what's really occurring. So there is deliberate movement that people have to hurt other people. In general, I think that people are unable to communicate in a way that's never been seen before in the history of the world, because they are unable to communicate the truth, because everything has been brought into a level of just relativism. It's the way I feel must be, it is true.
What you said, give me a parallel between that and a victim mentality, like when we talk about bullying.
Yeah.
Because there's bullying, and then think 40 years ago, what was the culture's response toward being bullied, you stand up for your like, you rather than saying, like, "We need to attack and eliminate all the bullies," I think one thing we've taught our children is to how to respond when someone is putting you down, how to respond when someone is bullying you, like,
But that's
your
reality.
response matters.
But
You
that's
could
reality.
say, "Oh, how awful, you poor child," which is true, and you need to step in other ways too. We need to address the problem, not escape it.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you have to be able to be prepared to deal with reality. Are you prepared to deal with difficult personalities? But a lot of people were not prepared to deal with any difficulty. And they're told by every other dimension of society that if something's difficult, it must be wrong, run away because it's bad for you. And that plays on our mental, our neurosystem, right? As soon as I experience something that is challenging, my brain produces doubt. So now we've added not just the doubt, but now the fear. So now you have doubt and fear. So now you're going to have problems at a higher and higher level. It's kind of like in the 70s, like there was a word, a phrase that was generated called self-esteem. Prior to the 70s, self-esteem didn't exist. Then they started to use the term, and it turned out nobody, little Johnny doesn't have self-esteem. Nobody has self-esteem. And so like for 50 years now, it's been this big crusade of, well, everyone's got low self-esteem, but it's a marketing campaign. So there is psychological propaganda that flows into your social media. It flows into your feed. It flows into your college, right? Where you went to school to tell you these things that have weakened society. We know it's weakened society. It's not a question. It's not my opinion. We know because people's mental health is deteriorating.
Mhm.
Suicide is. Now, most couples think their marriage problem is communication. It's not. The real problem is that most couples are having the same conversation over and over again. You've probably heard this before. Well, we've already talked about this. Well, you always say that. You never listen to me. Why do we keep on having the same fights over and over again? None of this is a communication issue. It's a direction issue. You're trying to solve problems while walking in the same conversational circle. And the more you talk about it, the more stuck it feels. Healthy couples don't avoid conflict. They change the direction of the conversation. And when the direction changes, everything changes. So I'm going to be teaching a free webinar where I'm going to show you the simple shifts couples use to move their marriage forward without therapy sessions, without blame, and without digging up the past. If you want to learn how to change the direction of your marriage and the conversations there, click the link and join us. I think that you're going to find it surprisingly helpful. Going up, divorce is going up, people's ability to cope with basic things is going down. Buying a car is terrifying for people. Figuring out what they want to do if they go to college is terrifying. Picking out a series on Netflix is terrifying. Everything. And so again, we have to be careful about the narratives that we tell ourselves. So one thing as we're talking about this is if you have a story in your head, so this is my 2 cents wisdom about this stuff is the story you tell yourself about your spouse. If that story you tell, like, oh, my husband is such an awful person and he hates our kids and he hates our life and he thinks I'm a horrible woman. If that story gives you peace, then it's true. If that story you tell yourself does not give you peace, well, then it's not true. And you have to figure out what the truth actually is. Because if it's true, you'll have peace. And that's really important. And so a lot of times people tell these stories and they feel horrible. They feel terrified. They feel enraged. They feel helpless. But
So
we
you're
still
saying so then maybe that spouse doesn't actually feel like that.
no, what I'm saying is that the whole story that your spouse hates you, they think you're awful. Yeah, I don't think that that's the full picture. I think that there's pieces that are missing. And hopefully you can find somebody that can help you find those pieces, whether it's a friend or a priest or a counselor or whatever. Ideally, though, we want to get to the truth because like you said before, like people are unable to speak the truth. And that's one of the biggest problems in marriage is I'm so afraid that I can't speak the truth that I literally create a vacuum where both spouses get frustrated. So I think that's one of the big cores of why people feel emotionally abused in their marriages is it's not really easy right now. It's not like the 1950s or 60s or 80s where you could talk easily with your spouse. Now you have to be afraid. Am I offending the person? Am I too controlling? As a husband, am I too controlling?
We are way more offended as a society in general than
We
ever
are, yeah,
before.
we're way more offended, and people are very afraid. Men are afraid to give a woman a compliment, even if it's a regular compliment. People are afraid to help other people's kids, right? I mean, I was outside like last summer, and there was a little boy in red pajamas outside my office, and he was probably 2.5, 3 years old, wandering near the street. And I pulled over the car and I stopped and I was right near this little boy, and I just was there because there was no adults. And
Yeah,
the cars, I work on a busy thoroughfare, so there were hundreds of cars that had gone by this kid. Nobody stopped. Everybody thought that somebody would stop for this kid, or they thought that maybe the parents were indoors the apartment or something. But the apathy that we have, we're very sensitive, but we're so apathetic. So I think like we don't want to be apathetic in our marriage, though. We don't want to be missing stuff. I think that the apathy is way more of a problem than even the abuse, because I think that there's just a lot of absenteeism in marriage and a lot of resentment. But with emotional abuse stuff, like you were saying, like, well, how do you determine it? I mean, you can't tell somebody that feels emotionally abused that they're not being emotionally abused.
right.
That's just invalidating.
Yeah,
So if my wife comes to me and she says, "Well, Dan, I feel like you're emotionally abusive," this language is very intense, right? We
right.
hear the word abuse. I
Yeah, but
may
if I
hear,
said that to you, I feel like that's emotionally abusive. I feel like you're the kind of person who would say, "Well, that's horrible. I'm sorry, and what is it that I'm saying that I can change?" But what if you were the type of spouse who said, "That's ridiculous. You're just an idiot. You're always so, blah blah blah," blah," and then denigrating me and not validating me, and then even taking it. Did you know there are two kinds of desire in marriage? One just shows up, the other has to be built. Most couples only wait for spontaneous desire, the kind that feels automatic. But over time, that one fades and fluctuates. Responsive desire is different. It grows from closeness, from touch, from emotional safety, from friendship. And when you understand the difference, everything changes. We created a free guide called Into Me You See, a couple's guide to true intimacy to help you rebuild trust, lower pressure around sex, and develop desire in a healthy, natural way. If you want deeper emotional and physical connection, download it now. It's free. Click the link in show notes or go to heartsrenewed.org and start tonight. Further, you know.
yeah.
So what do you do when your spouse doesn't respond?
Well, I think the first thing is like if somebody is an emotionally abusive person, like if you feel like you're being emotionally abused, you have to realize that that person's level of confidence is very low, either because they have other bad habits or they're depressed, probably a series of things. Okay. Because when people get violent with language, they are afraid. People don't attack other people unless they're afraid. So I'm not making excuses for people. I'm just saying
Right.
that that's the reality
Yeah.
of it. So you need to kind of take a step back because there's other problems that have to be addressed. And you also have to keep in the back of your mind that there are serious concerns. Because sometimes people will say, well, my spouse is a narcissist. He always says these negative things. If he's really narcissistic, right? So there are people that have, we'll just say that they have neurodivergence or they have spectrum problems, right? They might have autism or Asperger's and they don't recognize other people's emotions. But the majority of people that we view as narcissistic are very, very depressed. And they actually, if they have those criteria, they're more at risk for suicide than the average person, right? These are people horribly depressed. So that's why if you attack them and you say, well, or you defend yourself, you're like, oh, you're a narcissist. Oh, you can't say this stuff. You're emotionally abusive. Well, they're definitely going to be defensive or they're going to humiliate you more. And so again, you're not going to win by trying to defeat the other person that way. You do have to, I think, you have to get a center of your own confidence that is not required with this person because it's bullying, right? So it's spousal bullying. So stay tuned. Tomorrow, we need to talk about this because we're running low on time, but we need to talk about how do we break the spousal bullying thing where I'm picking on my wife, and again, that's the way I'll view it. I'm not saying that there are multiple forms of abuse. Again,
We're using husband to wife. It definitely can go the other way. And
yeah,
I know we've both seen that too. So
yeah, and again, it could be husband to wife, wife to husband. But again, we do agree that abuse does exist. We live in a very hard time, though, where I would say there's more of it because of the problems with communication and the problems with, just the resiliency of human beings and, just no societal support. So come back tomorrow. We're going to talk about this, how to break this pattern of bullying, though. Okay. So if you haven't hit subscribe, please do. If not, now's your shot, right? So keep us in your prayers, and we will be back tomorrow.